mentioned clay. I think the Commune context is a claymation piece. How did you come up with that?
I think I try to be as intentional with my medium as possible. And here I was thinking a little bit about identity and how identity changes constantly, and clay reflects that obviously and quite constantly. You can keep changing it, you can change it back and forth. All of that sort of came together, and I just knew I wanted to do claymation for this one. The more you create, the more you see yourself put stuff out, the more you realize, okay, I can actually maybe do this.
Yeah.
And then you just keep going.
Hi Damini, what's up? We're in your home. Thank you for having us. We're obviously here for Absolut Creative Commune. But tell me about your space first. It's such a cool spot. You have a lot going on.
Thank you first. This is my home in Delhi. This is the living room. We just have a bunch of art around here. You'll probably see some of it. Pieces we've collected from all over the world. Some of my older pieces, some of my grandmom's pieces, just a mix. And I've been here for about 5 years, so this is home.
Awesome, nice one. You mentioned your grandmom has a couple of pieces in here as well. Is that probably like the first exposure you had to art making or print making?
Yeah, for sure. My mom is an artist as well. My grandmom is an artist. Both of them mainly oil painters. And my dad, he also takes photographs. My sister writes. So it's always been part of my growing up that art has just been a part of our lives. Even though we all do very different mediums, it's just kind of created that space for me growing up where art was seen as a really legitimate, really valuable thing. So that's where I sort of got the courage to make it a career, I guess.
I mean, you also do a lot of different things. I think art is a very broad umbrella, but if you had to describe the work that you're doing right now, how would you do that?
It's like you said, a bunch of different things. I work in a few different mediums. Mainly right now what I'm trying to focus on is comics and visualizing graphic narratives. I do a lot of children's books. That's mainly in a digital medium, sometimes drawn on paper with ink. But I also work in 3D media. I work with needle felting quite a bit. I do a lot of work with clay. I like to mix it up because I get bored very easily. But it's a very wide umbrella, like you said, and I like to keep things fresh and new as possible.
Cool, awesome. You mentioned clay. I think your piece in the Commune context is a claymation piece. How did you come up with that? Like, how did that happen?
I think I try to be as intentional with my medium as possible. So with the concept I was thinking of, I wanted a medium that reflected that. And here I was thinking a little bit about identity and how identity changes constantly, and clay reflects that quite obviously and quite constantly. You can keep changing it, you can change it back and forth. So I decided to go with that, and also stop motion, because I have like a bit of a nostalgic connect to stop motion. I think a lot of us grew up watching like Wallace and Gromit. I used to watch a show called Prometheus and Bob on Nickelodeon, which was incredible. So all of that sort of came together, and I just knew I wanted to do claymation for this.
Oh, nice. Claymation is also a pretty intensive process in that there's obviously many different moving elements, and I think from what you explained, it's all being recorded in sort of one go. What is that process like?
So it's quite a controlled process, because you have to make sure that certain things like don't change at all. If the light changes or if the camera frame changes, then you have to start from scratch. And if it's like a 40-50 second video at 12 frames per second, that's like 600 frames. So you don't want to start from scratch. So yeah, it's quite an involved process, but it is really fun because you're making as you go along. So you're molding the clay, each frame is like slightly moving things, and you're creating an illusion of movement. So it's a super interesting process actually. It's very involved, but it keeps you on the whole time.
And I think there's so many expressions in your piece as well, like making sure the faces and the expressions really translate what you're trying to is probably quite an intricate process in itself too.
Yeah, but it's also where I get to have fun with it. So that's where I didn't want to keep things too controlled. So say if I wanted to like make an expression change from happy to sad, thinking of what comes between that was kind of up to me in the moment. So I can change things. I can make him like do a little round face, a little round mouth or whatever. So the expressions are where you can really play around.
I'm curious, when you start on a project, because you already work with so many different mediums, how do you decide that, okay, this is the right medium for this particular project or this particular narrative?
I think it comes down to a few different things. If I'm working with a client on a project, it depends on time as well. You know, some mediums take a lot longer to create, a lot longer to edit than others. But with some projects, it's also about the intentionality of what I'm trying to say. So like I said earlier, like it comes down to, is clay going to say this better? I have a sculpture I made a couple of years ago called Gut. And in that context, I wanted to use needle felting because the materiality of the wool reflected the hair, which is what I wanted to represent in that one. So yeah, I like to think about the medium I'm choosing. But yeah, it also sometimes depends on very practical things like time and, you know, how much like energy I have to put into that project, etc.
Yeah, super interesting. How did you get into this work altogether? Like, I understand that your family was obviously involved in art making in different ways, but what was your sort of landing spot in deciding that this is what I'm going to do?
It's funny because for my undergrad, I did history in DU. And I was undecided between doing art or a liberal arts degree like history at that point. And I think I chose history because it was a bit of the safer option. I was a bit afraid of like, you know, maybe fully committing to art at that point because you hear all these horror stories of the starving artist trope as well, right? So no one wants to be that. But as it went on, you also realize that you don't have to, at least for me, I realized that you don't have to necessarily commit to one discipline if you're interested in it, especially when you're like 18, 19 years old. So after, like even the time I was doing history in college, I was doing a lot of posters for plays and directing plays and things like that. And that's where I felt more alive. So post-history, I started just teaching myself basics of like designing, and I got back to painting more than ever before. And then I just moved into full-time illustration. It just became quite a natural progression. And I realized that you don't have to just do like one discipline, right? You can do multiple things, they can overlap, you can, you know, world is your oyster.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, from what you were telling me about the kind of work you're doing now, it's a mixed bag of many different things. I want to talk a bit about comics. You've been making comics for a while now. What is that process like? I think it's an interesting format that obviously has become insanely popular over the last decade or 2 decades. But it's such a simple, rooted, honest form of narrative storytelling. What do you think of comics and where we're at with, let's say, the landscape of comic culture?
I think that's what it is. Like you said, it's honest and it feels simple. And the more like digital a lot of my work tends to go, the more I sort of crave that simplicity. So in the last maybe 5 years or so, I really have been drawn more to comics than ever before. I've also like grown up reading a lot of comics. I even now consume a lot of graphic novels. I look up to a lot of graphic novelists. I just feel the art form is the most interesting way of storytelling to me because it's also so accessible, right? It's essentially like the most democratic way of storytelling because comics always find a way to be told. Even right now we have Instagram and there are comics on Instagram. Earlier we had like paperbacks, comics were on paperback. So comics are just always around, they're very persistent. I think that's what draws me to them.
I think it's also a really interesting layer of painting these worlds that sometimes words can do, but in a more maybe imaginative way, but comics just allow you to see what, you know, the universe behind those words could look like or feel like.
Yeah, it combines the visual and the written, right, in a way that like sort of wakes up the brain. And that's why, like, when you're a kid, you like to look at children's books with visuals, you like to look at comics because it sort of keeps you alert. And maybe that's helpful now with our like depleting sort of attention spans. But yeah, comics have, I mean, there are a lot of different things I love about comics, but it is what you're saying, it's that world building within it, that the way of storytelling, the abstraction of storytelling within it that has always drawn me and keeps me creative, really. It helps me like think outside the box.
Nice. This one might be a bit broad to answer, but obviously when you're creating a work, you have a vision in mind and you're trying to tell a story or translate an emotion. Do you ever think about how somebody who's going to see it for the first time receives it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's always part of the process, is taking yourself out of artist shoes and into like audience shoes, because we are all consumers of art first and foremost, right? Like that is part of the process, is also consuming art. So the perspective is important. Like they always say, like when you're making a painting, take a few steps back and like look at it for a while, or like take some time away from it. So yeah, it is very important to me that I get my own feedback on that, and also just ask people around me, like, what do you think about this? It's an important part of the process.
We were just speaking earlier about how it feels like the more digital art making becomes, just generally speaking, it's also a bit overwhelming sometimes. Like I run into situations all the time where a very simple idea can be translated without a lot of technology. But then as soon as there's a lot of technology sort of brought into being able to tell that story, it just becomes this overwhelming piece. And you mentioned that you think there's almost like this drawing back of attention to more simple, analog, like, handmade sort of things. Do you think that's sort of the direction we're going to head into with as much digital we have around us right now?
I mean, I don't know how much I can speak on the larger sort of cultural landscape there, but you're right? Like we're trying to push stimulation in the visual arts to an insane degree now. We're just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. We're constantly scrolling through our phones. We're always looking at something, and we're looking at a lot of art right now. A lot of it is digital, a lot of it is handmade, but all we're seeing is really like videos and pictures of it. So the end result is digital. So yes, I do think a lot of people are like sort of being drawn more to the handmade and also to making more. I see so many people being drawn to workshops nowadays where you're making stuff with your hands, where you're just making for fun, not trying to make a job out of it. So yeah, I mean, while there's this pull one way, I think it also sort of rubber bands as hard the other way.
Yeah, for sure. Do you ever feel the need to sort of introduce more digital elements into, let's say, illustrations or comics or claymation, or do you feel like those are sort of two different lanes?
I work digitally for a lot of my comics, mainly because it's a lot better for time. So earlier when people would make comics, if you wanted a change in a frame, you would have to sort of redo it, or you'd have to like put a piece of white paper over it and draw that part over again. So it was a really involved process and really time consuming. So now we don't have that time because people want to produce things a lot faster. The turnaround times are crazy. So digital will always be part of the process too. I have to be as literate with it as possible, even if I don't want to be. And there are a lot of advantages to it. I mean, it makes artistic processes a lot easier. It makes animation so much better, so much easier. But again, the more we push it that direction, the more we're expected to like up the ante every time.
How do you start a piece these days? Like when you're sitting in front of a blank canvas, let's say on your iPad or your computer or even a piece of paper, like you've obviously been doing this for a while now. Is there like a process to it, or is it kind of different each time?
I think the beginning, like I think most artists would feel this way, the beginning of the piece is always stressful because you're looking at a blank piece of paper, or you're looking at a blank screen, or you're looking at just nothing, and then you have to create something to put in there. So I think there's a few different ways to deal with that, like how do you get over that initial hump. And for me, that's a lot about research. I think just trying to spend some time with the subject and learning more about it, just doing what's fun about it for a little while, if that's consuming some media about it, or even just like making stuff for fun that isn't necessarily part of the output. Like I'll just sketch or draw randomly around the subject to begin. And then slowly you sort of find your way in it. I think it just sort of, the more you create, the more you see yourself put stuff out, the more you realize, okay, I can actually maybe do this. And then you just keep going. It's, but the process is always different, but I never know what it's going to look like exactly.
Yeah, no, it is totally like almost like a feedback loop with yourself, because once you start, it's going to go different places. It will always go to plan. At least for me, that's how it is.
Absolutely, and you have to learn to lean into that. I think the one thing I've learned doing this for like about maybe 7 or 8 years now is that you have to lean into that spontaneity, you have to lean into a little bit of unknown and just let yourself have fun with the process, because if it's too controlled, your piece isn't going to breathe.
Yeah, in terms of, where you're drawing influences from, so to speak, I think most artists are trying to draw influences from their own journey in life and maybe places they travel to or people they meet. What does that mix look like for you? Like, where are you drawing your influences from these days?
So many different things. I think sometimes it's other art that I get to see. Sometimes it's just things I witness on like a walk. But a lot of it, I think, especially with my comic work and the storytelling that I've been doing lately, has been just little anecdotes or things that happen to me in daily life and just trying to be observational about what I document. It's a documentation process, because I think that documentation then leads to larger things. And if you let it just go and let your inspiration just sort of speak for itself, then you end up finding like the conclusion to your piece in a more interesting way and in an unexpected way.
Awesome. You mentioned you've been traveling quite a bit. I think I always find this interesting, asking all my artist friends, do you think you're able to create the same way when you're on the move? Or is it more like you need to be in your space, in your studio, around your tools?
I'm very jealous of people who can like travel and be like journaling and illustrating on the move and creating really awesome stuff. I need to be there. I'm also kind of an anxious traveler, so when I'm there, I'm just like, I need to be, thinking of what's next. But I don't create that well on the move, but I think it's super nice to have that break and that time to just let yourself be inspired. Then when I come back, I'll be a little bit of a hermit in the studio, and I love that. I love to stay in. I like to like spend late nights in my studio, just have fun, just make stuff. So yeah, it's actually a mix, because like one is like feeding into the other.
For sure. It's also like, I like to think of it as this process of marination. Like every time I'm traveling or meeting new people and I'm not necessarily creating, it's just sort of absorbing as many ideas, as many things as possible. And then when I'm back in the studio, I'm like working with a lot.
Yeah, and you're like itching to make what you've been thinking about for that whole like 2 weeks or 1 month. You've got all these ideas stewing in your head, and that's what like keeps you going, right? The breaks keep you going.
Tell us about the piece you made for Commune. How did that come about? How would you describe it to someone who hasn't seen it yet?
So how I describe it is that it's a claymation piece, a short film, and it follows the journey of a ball of clay on an artist's desk, essentially. And it kind of talks about how identity is fluid and constantly changing, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like that is often the journey of an artist. Like we're constantly wearing different hats and trying to almost be like water in that sense, to sort of fit into different environments, situations, ideas, and so on. Yeah, very cool. How long did it take you to put this together though?
So it took a long time from like, say, the storyboard, the first idea, everything sort of comes together. When we're talking about the actual action of shooting the claymation, if you boil it down to say like a week, I think it took me did a test shoot, which was about 4 hours. And then I re-sculpted some stuff for another 3 or 4, and then a last shoot, which was 5 hours.
Wow.
So that was like when I had to really be on.
Yeah.
But before that, the process is so long, right? You're like storyboarding. I storyboarded on paper first. I then moved to my iPad. I then put it together on my computer. And then when I started sculpting, that was its own different sort of part of the process.
Awesome. So we're here at your desk. Do you want to tell us a bit about how you sort of made the piece?
Yeah, of course. So it's a few steps to the process. But essentially how I start is I'll storyboard it. I'll visualize what I want it to look like, first on paper, then on my iPad, sort of think about the colors I want to use. But then it comes down to really building the set. So what I did here was, because it was a top-down shoot, I got an overhead sort of tripod to put my phone in. I also put a second one there for stability, just to make sure it doesn't shake at all, because you need to make sure it doesn't shake for stop motion. And then I created a little bit of set. I made this set using found objects, so just stuff around the house really. Put it together in the way that I thought was looking nice. And then I created some sort of sculptures. I used clay to make the character I wanted to, but I also made it as modular as possible. So for example, like his eyes are beads, so if I wanted to move them around, I could literally just move them like this and make them sort of move around instead of physically having to like draw that every time. So I did that, I built the set, I had all my sculpture ready. And then after that, I essentially moved the clay around, which is part of the process. And I also screen mirrored my phone to my MacBook and had a little clicker so that I wouldn't have to move my phone at all.
Right.
And
you can also monitor without having to change too much every time.
Exactly. And I don't want to be looking into my phone screen or pressing that. Right. So say this is a shot, I'll just click it and then it like registers over there. Then click another one. Oh, that's not happening.
Right, but it essentially takes a photograph and then you change what you need to and then it takes another one.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. And how long did that whole process, I mean, obviously the preparing of it takes time, but once you had all the pieces, the whole shoot itself, how long does that take?
I think the final shoot was about 5 or so hours, one straight shot, because you can't really pause in the middle. I also have the lighting really regulated so that I'm not depending on natural lighting, because if that happens, then, you know, your frames are going to be different the first half.
And things start looking different.
Exactly.
Right. Wow. So 5 hours for a 25-second piece.
Essentially, yes.
But that's a really cool process. Yeah, I've seen stop motion done before, but like not in this style, not with clay. So super interesting. Yeah. And did you already know the kind of faces that you were making, or did they kind of happen and change along the way as well?
It's actually a super fun process to figure that out, because you have to make sure that it's modular so that you're not sculpting too much on the go. And I wouldn't be wasting too much time doing that. Otherwise, the shoot would be not 5 hours, but 10. So what I essentially did was I pre-prepared a few different pieces. Like say if I want to show him blinking, I have a half lid like these ones over here, but I also have full lids. So I would take a half lid, place it on his eyeball, and then shoot it, put a full lid, shoot it, put a half lid again, shoot it, and that's a blink.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of the trickery of it all. I have a lot of pre-prepared pieces like these mouths. I had some noses prepared, some eyebrows prepared. I think the ears as well I had done beforehand. So all of it was just done in a way that I can move it on the go.
Cool, nice. I love the sunglasses too. It's a nice touch. So I want to ask you, when you first heard of the theme Born Colorless, what was your take on it? Like, how did you interpret that?
I think immediately my mind went to the idea of like potential and how limitless potential can be. That we're all born essentially the same, but the art we consume, the people we surround ourselves with, our communities, they shape us and make us who we are. And like we were speaking about earlier as well, the idea is that we are constantly changing, and leaning into that is part of both the artistic process and also like the human experience. So that's what Born Colorless felt like to me. It's just that we can be whoever we want to be.
I think specifically within the context of India, we're all also a mix of many different things. Like, I don't think most people who grew up or live in India can fit neatly into just one box, because we're surrounded by like so many cultures, so many colors, noises. Each place looks slightly different every few kilometers you travel. Do you think that sort of more hyper-local or local experience also plays into your work?
Absolutely, and probably to an extent that I don't even know, because I've always lived here, and it influences us in a deeper way than I think any of us can even acknowledge fully. But it's so incredible, right, that we have access to so many different cultures and languages and ideas of people, and that we feel the freedom to move between one and the other, to grow into different people. So yeah, I mean, India is like the best place to be for this sort of idea or this take on the theme, because it's so immense and so vast.
It's also very plural, I think. In the sense, I think many parts of the world can become very defined as places, but even if you just take Delhi, it's very hard to define Delhi, right? There are some very maybe typical things that are of Delhi or characterize Delhi, but even then, so there's so many other things that are constantly sort of shaping the identity of a place in India.
Yeah, exactly.
Also.
It's like you can try and define it or pigeonhole it, but those definitions overlap immensely, and one's definition is not the other's. So even like moving here to Delhi like 10 years ago, my own idea of it has changed so much over the years. My own idea of myself in the context of the city has changed. So that's what you realize then. It's only about like leaning into change, no matter what it is, and just letting it happen.
For sure. And I think that word process is super important. I think in many conversations, I keep realizing with other people who are creating work that we're also now in this age of AI where so many things, previously very difficult to do things, are now possible with like a simple prompt or like a quick two-step kind of solution. But there's still something so beautiful about the process of making art, and I feel like it's really cool that there's still opportunities to be able to deep dive into a process and take that time and sometimes really like commit to a slightly longer process, even if there might be a much faster way to do it now. Do you enjoy that process, or do you kind of see yourself shifting in between sometimes?
I mean, I love it because it's that's what always brings me back to the table, right? If I'm attached to the outcome more than the process, I wouldn't come back that often, because sometimes you look back at an outcome and you don't feel the same way about it. Sometimes you love it, sometimes you don't. But the process, you always, I think, and I feel most artists feel this way, where you always do come back because of the becoming of the project. And there's this phase with this project as well where I think I became obsessive about it, and for a few days I was thinking about nothing else, and I was thinking of, my mind was probably in stop motion frames.
Yes.
But it's great to be in that phase. I like being obsessed with a piece, and that means that I'm putting myself into it, because without the process, like there's no meaning to all of this.
Totally. I mean, I couldn't have put it better. I'm excited for everyone to see the piece. I think it's beautiful. It's come out really nice. And I just want to say thank you for coming on board. Thanks for taking the time and chatting with me about it. And looking forward to everything else you have coming up too.
Thank you so much. This has been great. It's been great creating this piece and great chatting as well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Damini. See you.